Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumritamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stavitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasinduvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. This is a presentation being made for the pleasure of the devotees at the Bhakti-vaibhava Vidyapit at the Govardhan Ika village. And today we are taking a look at the 10 topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam as a means of fulfilling the requirements of the Bhakti-vaibhava study assessment. But it is still wonderful to be able to record this lecture because that is the wonderful nature of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that for whatever reason it is recited, there is purification and there is great ecstasy. So our topic for today is the 10 topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The 10 topics of the Bhagavatam is explained at the end of the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, in the 10th of the second canto of the Bhagavatam, in the 10th chapter. We find a verse of Srila Shukadeva Goswami, in which he explains what are the 10 topics that are explained within the Bhagavatam. But these 10 topics are also have to be understood. They are to be found within the Puranas as a whole, as a genre of literature. The Puranas are generally dealing with these 10 topics, and we will see them discussed again and again. As we know, there are many Puranic literatures, 18 of which are the main Puranas, and not that each Purana will contain all of them, but in general, this is what the Puranas deal with. Let's look at this verse for a moment. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atra Sargo Visargascha Sthanam Poshanam Utaya Manvantaresha Nukata Nirodo Muktirashraya. Shri Shukadeva Goswami said, in the Srimad Bhagavatam there are 10 divisions of statements regarding the following: the creation of the universe, the subcreation, planetary systems, protection by the Lord, the creative impetus, the change of Manus, the signs of God, returning home back to Godhead, liberation, and the summum bonum. So these 10 topics are explained in the rest of this chapter for a few verses. But then each of these topics is defined. What exactly does this topic entail? And so in this presentation we will take a look at each of these 10 topics and look at how the acharyas have defined what exactly this entails, what this means, what we can understand by these topics. And then at the end of the presentation, as a final part of the presentation, we will take a look at an interesting question which has been answered by different acharyas in different ways. And that question is, does the Bhagavatam deal thematically with each of these 10 topics in each canto? Or is it rather that the book as a whole will be able to find the cantos, the topics described throughout the book in each canto? So that is the question, a very interesting question that we will answer. And we'll see that there is not one answer. There is different acharyas approach it in a different way. We will look at the answer of Srila Jiva Goswami. We will look at the answer of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And then we'll also, interesting, look at Srila Prabhupada and how he sort of sometimes took both stands, and how the chapter titles in the BBT edition of the Srimad Bhagavatam is a little bit mysterious. But that we'll leave that mystery for the end. Okay, first Sarga and Visarga. Bhuta matrendriyadhyam janma sarga udharita brahmano guna vaishamyad visarga paurusha sprita. The elementary creation of 16 items of matter, namely the 5 elements, sound, form, taste, smell, and touch, and the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and mind, is known as Sarga, whereas the subsequent resultant interaction of the modes of material nature is called Visarga. So Sarga literally means creation. And Visarga V, the intensifier, a suffix used in Sanskrit that has different meanings. Sometimes it's an intensifier, so there is Jai and then there is Vijay, or great victory. Then there is Gyan and Vigyan, or specific knowledge. So knowledge is Gyan, and then Vigyan is translated as realization. So knowledge, but a specific kind of knowledge. So similarly, we have Sarga and then Visarga, creation, and as we see here, it's sub-creation or specific creation. So what exactly does this mean? If you look at the Bhagavatam version of creation, then we will see how the Bhagavatam explains to us that everything is coming from God. Most theistic traditions, they understand, yes, God is the creator. God is the creator, but how exactly does he create? And what does he create with? Where does it come from? For example, in the Catholic tradition, we have this concept of ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. They understood that there is God, and they understood that there's a world, and God created the world, but from what did he create the world? And then the answer is ex nihilo, from nothing. He is God, he can do everything. So that is true, that he is God, he can do everything. But the Bhagavatam gives a little bit of a more, I could say, scientific understanding of the creation. And it also, the creation is also answering another question, and that is how exactly is it that God is involved with this world? What is God's relationship with this world? Okay, yes, he created it, but does he still influence it? Is it still dependent on him? We see that in the 18th century, in the Western world, there was the rise of philosophies like deism, because what happened at that time in the world, the general population was very, very religious. But as science became more and more developed, then it was more difficult for intelligent people to have this innocent kind of view of the role of God, that God is creating everything and keeping everything maintained, because they could see that there are scientific laws that seem to function on their own accord. So then a philosophy came around, which is deism. This idea that God created the world like a watchmaker. He created everything and he wound it up and then he just let it go. So even though he created it in the beginning, now it is just going on automatically by the laws that he set in place and the energy that he put in motion. So the Bhagavatam version is very different. The understanding of the Bhagavatam, how Krishna exactly creates this world, the integral part that we have to understand there is the Purusha avatars. It is by the expansion of God. So it is this idea is that firstly, what is the creation made of? It's coming from the energy of God. And that is important. It doesn't come from nothing. It comes from God's energy. God has uh, Shakti Vividhaya Shriyate. He has unlimited energies. One of these energies is this material energy that he has. And it is his personal energy that is expanded from him. And then the creation is understood that then the God is Mahavishnu, and then the first Purusha avatar lies in the causal ocean upon which the material universes float. And then as he exhales, the bubbles come out. And then he enters into each of this bubble, each of these universes, as the second Purusha avatar, the Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, who then lies at the bottom of each universe, where it is also filled with water. From his navel, Lord Brahma comes. And then the third Purusha avatar is the Kshirodakashayi Vishnu, who then enters into every atom and every and he is within every jiva, next to every jiva that is in that universe. The third Purusha avatar is there. So in this way, the Purusha avatars explain how God creates the world from his own energy, and then also how he enters into at each successive step. Krishna is there personally in his expanded features. So this Sarga and Visarga is then specifically explaining. Sarga is this process where the 16 items of matter, the bhutas, the matras, the indriyas, the elements, the sense objects, and also the subtle creation, the mind and the intelligence and the ego, these elements, how they are created from this energy by God in a gradual successive motion of unfolding due to the modes of nature that are activated by the glance of God in the form of time. So there is an undifferentiated material energy, and by Krishna's glance, then it becomes activated, and then the modes differentiate, and then there's this gradual creation of the elements. But this means this is the basic building blocks. So the basic building block is created by Krishna, Sarga, the elements of creation, and that is described in the Bhagavatam. And then Visarga means the specific creation, the secondary creation, and this is done by Lord Brahma. So by the time that Lord Brahma takes his birth or becomes conscious and awake within this universe, and he is, as we know, Atmaja, self-born, or born from, not by a mother and a father, but born from the navel of Lord Vishnu. He makes his appearance as the first conscious being, highly intelligent, but at the same time the universe at that point is still disorganized. There is simply the elements of creation is existing, but it has not been organized. So then the Visarga is the process by which Lord Brahma starts to create the various bodies of the living beings, starts to assemble them in different shapes and forms and sizes to accommodate the various kinds of consciousness that will have to manifest within this world. So that is Visarga, the creation of Lord Brahma, or one would rather say the organization of matter, the secondary organization, or the assembly of bodies that is done by Lord Brahma. So that is the Sarga and the Visarga, the first two topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam that we will find, and it is also described in many of the Puranas. Okay, this next verse, three topics is covered here. Sthanam, Manvantaras, and Uti. So let's see how each of these is defined. Stitir Vaikunta Vijaya, Poshanam Tatanugraha, Manvantarani Saddharma, Uttaya Karma Vasana. The right situation for the living entities is to obey the laws of the Lord, and thus be in perfect peace of mind under the protection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The manus and their laws are meant to give right direction in life. The impetus for activity is the desire for fruitive work. Okay, so first, sthanam. Sthanam literally means situated. How things are situated, the situation, the deal. What is the deal with the material universe? How are things here? So here we see Stitir Vaikunta Vijaya. So this is a very interesting Sanskrit verse. Prabhupada translated means understand that the right situation, how things are supposed to be situated, that one has to be under the protection of the Lord, because he is Vaikunta Vijaya, then peacefulness will reign, will have victory if one is properly situated. That is the proper situation. Now, the way that some of the acharyas explain it is that the situation is that the Lord is always victorious. That is the situation. That even though we enter into this world, that so many things are happening, but ultimately we are controlled. God's desire, the plan of God, is always superior, is always victorious. The situation is that God's will reigns within this world, and the various positions that the living being finds themselves in, they are placed there according to the laws of God. They are placed there by God's will, in harmony with or in accordance with the law of karma. So that is important to understand that what we do, nothing is random. As we see, that is the big difference between the modern worldview and the theistic worldview. So in the modern worldview, people think that things happen by chance. Or, as Krishna explains in the 16th chapter, people think that they themselves, whatever happens is just due to their own work. So people think that you are situated where you are because you have worked for it. But that is not the case. Stitir Vaikunta Vijaya. People are situated according to the plan of God. And there's a law that happens. So if you go up in the universe or down in the universe, you are placed in your specific part of the universe due to higher arrangement that looks at what you have done and then accords to you a certain position. So that is very important. This idea of the situatedness being organized by higher beings is also, if the living being has this understanding, that it's not just in the universe as a whole, but then also even in society, that society has to now also be organized in accordance with the plan of God. So these ideas are very powerful. We see that modern organization is based, capitalist society is based on the idea that by people's work they will elevate themselves up and down. That is true to a certain extent, but also not completely true, because we still see that people are born with a certain kind of capability. And the Vedic system is then interesting because it assesses people's capability, which they are born with, the karma that they are born with from the previous life, the inclination that they have to work in a certain way, and then situates them according to Krishna's plan. Krishna says naturally in the Chaturvarnam Maya Sarishtam that he has created the four Varnas, which means that is God's plan for how beings should be situated according to their natural inclinations to work. And if one follows that, then there will be great success. If we don't follow that, then there will be confusion. But as Prabhupada points out, that we can never really destroy the four Varnas because they are still inevitable, even in a communist society in which they try to create a single Varna or they try to destroy all social distinction. The same thing happened. The same four Varnas arose because Stitir Vaikuntha Vijaya, the Lord's arrangements, is always victorious. The situation is that we are under his rules. So therefore, the more pious one is, the better the arrangement is. The more one resists or resents Krishna's arrangement, then the worse you will make it. But you won't be able to change it because the Lord is always victorious. Therefore, Prabhupada says the right situation is to obey the laws of the Lord, and thus one will be in perfect peace of mind, because the Lord Himself is always peaceful in mind. And the more one obeys His desires, the more one moves towards His qualities and His experience. It's very nice. Okay, next one. Poshanam Tadanugraha. Okay, so Poshanam. Poshanam means literally protection. So Poshanam Tadanugraha also can be translated as Poshanam is that mercy, the mercy of the Lord given by the Lord. So special protection. Now this Poshanam is very, very interesting. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains how in the sixth canto, we will later come to that, how he explains that canto is dealing with Poshanam. But he explains that what is this protection of the Lord? What is this Poshanam? What does it mean? We see that the rules of Dharma already give beings a certain kind of protection. If you follow the rules of Dharma, then you will be protected. You will get good results. If you are pious, then you will have good health, you will have good family, you will have a peaceful mind. You will be protected by Dharma if one follows the laws of piety within this world. But that is not the protection that is this is not the protection that we are speaking about here. Poshanam is something different. Poshanam is the special protection that the Lord gives to his devotees, even if they disobey, accidentally break the laws of Dharma. So this is very special and important to understand. That is really where we see the Lord's special mercy, Tadanugraha. That's when we see the mercy of the Lord, when he protects the living being, even if the living being transgresses the rules of Dharma, which is also what Krishna promises, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Braja. Antam Sarva Papabhyo Mokshayishami Masucha, is that if one is surrendering to Krishna by performing devotional service, he will protect one from the sinful reaction that might come from abandoning one's dharma. So that is one sense. And then he also says in the 9th chapter that even if someone does something horrible, if he does a bad work, let's see if we can find this nice verse. So I just forgot the Sanskrit for a moment. Apichetsu duracharo bhajate mamananyabhak sadureva samantafya samyafeva sito hisab. Even if one performs a horrible work, meaning that if one horribly transgresses the rules of Dharma, does something that is very sinful by accident, somehow or other it happens due to the force of previous habit, then one still will be protected. One should still be considered a sadhu if one is interested in devotional service, if one is rightly situated in his determination. So that is the portion, the protection of the Lord. And that is described in the Bhagavatam in various ways. We will look at the end of the section after we've covered them, we will look at the specific cantos that deal with it, and then we'll see how the different stories are related to this protection. Manvantara. The Manvantara is, so as we understand in the hierarchy of the universe, there is Lord Brahma as the creator, then there is the great sages, and then there's also the rulers of the various Manvantars, or the Manus. So the Manvantars are time periods. There's about 74 Manvantars in one day of Lord Brahma, I think. And each of these Manvantars then is there a period where there is a sub-ruler, a Manu, that is specifically reigning over the affairs of men But it seems not just like planet Earth, but more humanoids, or including then higher planetary beings that are being ruled by the Manus, and the Manus are specifically then giving the codes of action. They have to explain to us how to live and act because they understand the laws of Dharma. The laws of Dharma is very simple, but it's very straightforward, simple, do good unto others in one sense, but it can also become very complicated. So it has to be codified into various forms, specifically to understand what is right or wrong. You see in the Mahabharata, for example, that at a certain point they were all at such great faith in Dharma, and they all were very dharmic. But then we see when Draupadi was standing there being disrobed, she was asking Bhishma, uh, "What is this dharmic? Is it possible for a woman, for me, myself? Did my husband really lose me? Was it possible for him to lose me in the gambling match?" And then it was complicated. Who knew? And then Bhishma said, "This is the rules of Dharma are very difficult to understand." And so we understand at that point definitely it was irreligious. But the point is that even amongst highly intelligent people, there can be a differentiation, distinction between understanding what is right and what is wrong. We see even in the society of devotees also, strange things happen. One, we have had litigation between members of Krishna conscious movement. One person says that this is right, and the other person says that is right, and then it is who knows what is right. So Dharma, we need to understand Dharma by reference from higher authorities, not that we can understand it simply by ourselves. And one of the highest authorities within this world is the Manus, who give us the Dharma Shastras, like the Manu Samhita, the Yajnavalkya Shruti, various forms of Dharma Shastras that explain to living beings what is right and what is wrong. And in one sense, Prabhupada predicted that even his books will become the law books, the Dharma Shastras for the next 10,000 years, because it also changes by time period. Dharma has to be reinterpreted, not reinterpreted, but reapplied, because the times change. So we see that Prabhupada allowed women to get pramanical initiation, which is very radical. You won't find that in the Dharma Shastras, I can promise you that. But Prabhupada made that adjustment because he was an acharya. So therefore, we need to regularly Krishna sends his representatives again and again. So the Manvantars, they are controlled by the Manus, and the Manus, they teach Sadharma, either by their teachings or by their personal example. And we see this also, stories encountered in the Bhagavatam. Then Utaya Karma Vasana. Uti is described as the creative impetus, the impetus for activity. And it is described as the Karma Vasana. The Vasana means the samskara, so the impressions that is made upon the consciousness due to karma. Whenever we perform an activity, that activity creates a certain impression on the consciousness, and that impression will create the inclination to again act the same way in the future. And that is how we become addicted to certain things. So uti means then each of us, we are born with a certain inclination to work in a specific way according to the actions that we have performed in the past. So that is uti, the creative impetus, and that will also be explained in the Bhagavatam. Then there's Avataranucharitam Hareschasyanuvartinam Pungsam Ishakata Prokta Nanakyano. The signs of God, or the signs of the avatars, Ishakata, describes the incarnations of the personality of God and his different activities, together with the activities of his great devotees. So we see that that is then a unique understanding of the Vedic tradition. It is how God enters into this world in the form of various avatars who come on different missions to re-establish Dharma, to protect the pious, and to annihilate the miscreants. Their activities are wonderful, and their activities are our greatest shelter because we can discuss their activities. Otherwise, we'll have to discuss the mundane activities of this world. So the avatars, the various avatars, are explained, and then specifically the Bhagavatam is also here saying how it is together with the activities of their devotees also. So it is equally as important. The activities of the avatars and their devotees are very important. We see that it is also a unique feature of the Bhagavatam, that the Bhagavatam in general places much greater emphasis on the devotee than on the avatar of the Lord. The story of Prahlad Maharaj, for example, is explained In many Puranas, you will find the story of Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad Maharaj, but in the Bhagavatam, it is clear that Prahlad is the hero. Most of the pastime deals with Prahlad and his experience and his state of consciousness. And similarly, we see the story of Vritrasura, and Vritrasura is there and he is killed by Lord Indra, who was instructed by Lord Vishnu. But the hero of that story is Vritrasura, because he was the devotee. So therefore, it is important to understand that the Isha Katha, or the signs of the avatars, includes also the stories of the devotees, because the Lord and his devotees always appear together. That is why the Lord comes, for the sake of his devotees. Nirodha and Mukti. Nirodha Syanushayanam Atmana Sahashakti Muktir Hitvanyata Rupam Swarupena Vyavastiti. The merging of the living entity, along with his conditional living tendency, with the mystic lying down of the Mahavishnu, is called the winding up of the cosmic manifestation. Liberation is the permanent situation of the form of the living entity after it gives up the changeable, gross, and subtle material bodies. Okay. So Nirodha means the winding up. So we saw that Sarga and Visarga was explained, which is the winding down or the unfolding of the universe by the collective efforts, firstly of the Lord and then of Lord Brahma. And then at a certain point, the universe then will become retracted or destroyed, one could say, Nirodha. So when Mahavishnu breathes in and all the universes are retracted in himself, then that is Nirodha. So when the mystic lying down of the Mahavishnu winds up, and then the living being is also again retracted. So then, even though his gross physical form is destroyed, his karma becomes, his conditioned tendencies, his karma is, with his karma, he becomes folded in again, and again emerged into Lord Mahavishnu's body until the next creation when he will again manifest out. So this destruction of the universe, this total destruction, annihilation, Nirodha, which happens, is also described in the Puranas. And then Mukti, Muktir hit Vanyata Rupam. So when a living being gives up his changeable, gross, and subtle bodies, and then Swarupena Vivasati again becomes situated in his original permanent situation, that is Mukti. So there's a difference between Nirodha and Mukti. If the universe is destroyed, the living being does not necessarily attain Mukti, because he still stays, he still is covered. His subtle body goes with him, which is in which his conditioned tendency is stored there also. But when there is liberation, it means that the living being is actually freed from both his gross form and his subtle body. His subtle body is dissolved, all his karma is removed, and then the spiritual body can again manifest, and then the living being goes back to the spiritual world. So that is also described. And this is then a great understanding. What exactly is that swarup of the living entity? What does it mean? And then you understand the Bhagavatam gives us very clearly the understanding that the swarup of the living being is the service of God. And that is then explained in more colorful detail in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam when we see the Ashraya. Abhashascha nirodascha yatostyatya vasiyate sa ashraya param brahma paramatmeti sapyate. The Supreme One, who is celebrated as the Supreme Being or the Supreme Soul, is the supreme source of the cosmic manifestation as well as its reservoir and winding up. Thus he is the supreme fountainhead. So the Ashraya, the summum bonum, is then the absolute truth, from which all these things come, and in which all these things are again stored, and which is by which all these things are maintained. So that is Krishna, the fascinating reality of the absolute truth, the fountainhead of everything, from whom everything comes, both creation, destruction, maintenance, protection, the avatars, liberation, the creative impetus, everything is ultimately arranged. This the interactions of the Lord's various energies, but that Lord also has his own existence. So that is the Ashraya, and the most important part of the Bhagavatam. And the other 9 topics are actually just helping us to better understand the nature of the Ashraya. Now, we've covered basically explained the various definitions of the 10 topics. which we hope have been interesting and correct thus far. But now an interesting question comes up. Are the different cantos dedicated to different topics? Is it that the Bhagavatam is dealing in different cantos with different topics? Different answers have been given to this question. Jiva Goswami in his Krama Sandarbha says no. He says that one should not try to see that the different cantos are dealing with the different topics. He says rather the topics are everywhere to be found, spread out through the whole Bhagavatam. And that's true. We will see that we can find these 10 topics described all over the Bhagavatam. But then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary says, well, we can also say specific cantos have a specific flavor, one could say, a specific focus in which one of these things will be very prominent. So not that the other ones are not found there, but they will be prominent in each of these cantos. And that is very interesting if we use that vision and we see how the Bhagavatam, it allows us a specific vision of seeing how the different cantos have a different focus. And then we can see these things explained more clearly. Let's see here. Now, this is a very interesting graphic that shows us, on the left side, it shows us Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explaining. He says how the different cantos deal with the different topics. So the 10 topics are only introduced, as we said, at the end of the 10th canto. So then in this purport, the purports to that section, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that from now on, each of the cantos will have a focus on each of these 10 topics. So we see Canto 3 deals with Sarga, Visarga, it goes up until the 10th canto, we see is Ashraya, and then 11 and 12 is Nirodha and Mukti. So these different cantos deal with these different topics, or focus at least. Now, before we look, we can give a brief overview, thinking about the different pastimes and how they relate to these different topics. But then this also for interstate, we see that there is the BBT edition, the titles of the Bhagavatam cantos in the BBTs is very interesting because we see that they also actually reflect the 10 cantos, but not in the same order that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives. See, for example, Canto 1 deals with the creation, obviously Sarga, or the title is creation. Canto 2 is the cosmic manifestation, obviously Visarga. Canto 3, the status quo, or Sthanam, how things are situated. Canto 4, the creation of the fourth order, which is a very interesting title. We presume that would relate to Poshanam. Canto 5 title is the creative impetus, which is obviously then Uti. Canto 6, the prescribed duties for mankind, which is the Manvantaras, the Sadharma. Canto 7, the signs of God, Ishanukata. Canto 8, title, withdrawal of the cosmic creations, so Nirodha, obviously. Canto 9, liberation, Mukti. Canto 9, 10, the summon bonum, Ashraya. And then Canto 11 and 12 just gives a general history in the age of deterioration. Now this is very interesting because how these titles, the BBT chapter titles, are obviously referring to the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, but they don't actually match Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's description. And then furthermore, to add to the mystery, you see that Srila Prabhupada's purports from, I think, about the 4th or the 5th canto in the first verse, the Prabhupada also follows Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's summary. And he says, yes, he agrees with Vishwanath that this canto is dealing with this topic, but even the titles don't match. So that's very interesting, and we don't really have an answer to that. I personally asked Jayadvaita Swami about these chapter titles, and he says that that's what Prabhupada titled them, and they just accepted this Arsha Prayoga. So Prabhupada said that's the chapter title, so they accepted that as the chapter titles. But that's very interesting because somehow that's what it is. What can we say? Any case, let's take a look at Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur quickly to finish off, to see how in the different cantos these things are dealing. So in the 3rd canto, definitely we see Kapila Muni describes Sankhya, and it elaborately describes the different creations, the different elements of the universe. So that is Sarga in great detail. Canto 4, we see deals with Visarga. In Canto 4, we encounter Lord Brahma That's interesting though. Canto 4, we see that, yes, there's a story of Dhruva, so the different initial important beings. The first part of the universe is described. Dhruva, who is the son of, the grandson of Swayambhuva, Manu. And so this Vishwanath says that in that fourth canto, what we see described is the different bodies by Lord Brahma, or the population of the universe. Canto 5, describing the cosmic structure of the universe, or Sthanam, how there's the different planets, and on each of these different planets, by karma, people are situated. So that is describing the situation, how people are situated according to the laws of karma. Canto 6, Poshanam. We see in Canto 6 various stories of devotees who have performed sinful acts and who are still protected by the Lord. We see the story of Ajamil, who somehow got the Lord's special mercy, even though he was a very sinful person. We see the story of Lord Indra, who was again sinful. He first offended his spiritual master, then he was cursed, then he killed Vishwarup, and then he had to even kill Vritrasura, who was a great devotee. So he twice killed the Brahmana, but still he was protected by the Lord, ultimately, because he was, even though he was a Sakam, or devotee, he was still a devotee and he was still seeking the Lord's shelter. So we see that in Canto 6, the stories of how, and then we also see the story of Chitraketu himself, who ended up as Vishwarup, who was cursed because he offended Lord Shiva. So he again was cursed because of a sinful act, because of a disrespectful act, but still he was protected by God. So therefore, Canto 6, we see definitely deals with Poshanam, seeing how Krishna protects his devotees. Canto 7, Uti. Canto 7, we find the story of Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu, who are in one sense the two total opposite spectrums of what karma can be. See, Prahlad is by nature was a devotee, was by nature born a devotee, and Hiranyakashipu by nature a demon, very strongly within him. The creative impetus, the impetus for action was in both of these people, totally diametrically opposed. So that we see described the strength of karma, very powerful. We are born with a certain inclination to act, and that inclination is very, very strong. But then the question is how to change it. Therefore, see at the end of the seventh canto, Narada Muni describes to Yudhishthira Maharaj the whole science of Varnashram. And Varnashram is the science of gradually transforming one's impetus for action, taking it from the lower modes up to the higher modes, from the demoniac to the demigodly or the godly. So that's what we see in the seventh canto, Uti. In the eighth canto, find the story of various Manvataras, the churning of the milk ocean, the story of Pali Maharaj. So also explaining variously how Sadharma has established the action of different kings and their example that they set for us. Canto 9, Ishanukata, we find there the story of Lord Ram, for example, so the story of various avatars explained there. Also the story of Matsya avatar, so a few avatars and their devotees explained in Canto 9. Then in Canto 10, we find obviously the most important Ashraya, the story of Lord Krishna, the summon bonum, or the which we agree with, you see Prabhupada's or the BBT edition in Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's titles line up. So the Saman Bonam Ashraya, the description of Swayam Bhagavan, which is the whole goal of the Bhagavatam. 11th canto is described very analytical, the Uddhava Gita, and also in there is described the gradual destruction of the universe, the end of the universe. And Canto 12, we see the liberation of Maharaj Parikshit. So then the end of Maharaj Parikshit is also described. So that is a broad overview of the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam. So a very fascinating topic, really deep, gives us a great lens by which we can deeper penetrate into the mysteries of the Srimad Bhagavatam and allow us to deeper understand that the Bhagavatam is not just a random collection of stories, but is in fact a very intricately put together scripture. Everything is going from one point to another. Everything is interconnected in each canto and in the work as a whole. And if we see it as, if we don't understand the connections, then we won't see it. But it is there. But it has to be studied. So by understanding the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, we immediately gain an overview of what is happening in the Bhagavatam. It allows us to orientate ourselves because it's such a big work, such a big text. It takes a long time to understand it and come to grips with what is happening there. And so the 10 topics hopefully help us to gain some orientation for those who are more interested. We suggest looking at the commentaries by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and specifically from the third canto to the 12th, in the first text of each canto, he will give a description of the 10 topics, of which of the 10 topics is being dealt with, and how this canto is dealing with these 10 topics. We hope that this presentation has been to the satisfaction of the wonderful devotees at the Bhakti-vaibhava Vidyapit, who are so mercifully inclined to this fallen soul and are willing to give him this opportunity to do his presentation. And now they have to listen to it, and we hope that they are pleased. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.